Every day, heroes walk among us, ordinary people doing extraordinary things to change lives, restore hope, and create a better world. But they can't do it alone. This is more than just a story. It's a call to action.
Welcome to the Ripple Effects, where we shine a light on the organizations turning compassion into action. Because when we come together, hope isn't just a wish, it's a reality. And you have the power to be part of the change.
As of today, our current campaign with McGruff the crime dog warning about fentanyl and other fake pills and products has reached over 5 billion impressions for a total equivalent of more than $200 million in equivalent ad time. So what we have done is we have proven that you can still effectively get a message out to millions and millions of people repeatedly. Because we know science tells us, well, somebody's got to hear something about 5 times before it starts to sink in and they can take action on it. So we hit that mark. Since the campaign began on awareness around fentanyl, the death rate from fentanyl has dropped 25%. Wow. I think we can't attribute that all to what we've done, but we do know that public awareness is one of the biggest factors that has brought that number down. It's way too high, and we're not going to stop until we get it down more.
Paul Del Ponte, CEO of the National Crime Prevention Council and prevention strategist. One of the most influential voices in community safety today, all with the mission of empowering citizens to create safer neighborhoods and revolutionizing how we approach crime prevention in the digital age. Paul Del Ponte, transforming how America stops crime before it happens.
Hello, everybody. My name is Corey Sanchez. I am the host for the Ripple Effects podcast, and we have a special surprise for you today. So we're here with Paul Del Ponte. He is the CEO and director of the National Crime Prevention Council. And here's why it's just like so incredible. I mean, do any of you remember McGruff the crime dog? I remember watching all these amazing public service announcements when I was growing up as a young boy. In the 80s and 90s. But McGruff the crime dog, he first appeared in 1980. He's an American icon. And McGruff was always focused on different things, taking a bite out of crime, if you remember that. And so he's focused today on tackling first century crime. So we've got Paul Del Ponte here. So he's spent his career in politics. He's also spent it in building out public education programs. I'm going to go to him. We're going to hear his story. And he's got an interesting story about finding himself as a whistleblower in a government investigation. So this is interesting. So Paul Del Ponte has a big background of taking a bite out of crime himself. So thanks for joining us today, Paul.
You bet, Corey. Great to be on with you. And thanks for that intro. It's been an interesting background in many ways.
Yeah. Tell me your story. Tell me all about it.
My story. So I began my career in the political realm, working on political campaigns, and enjoyed that. Then switched over to the nonprofit world and noticed that I had a knack for helping develop public education campaigns, taking complex ideas and issues and breaking them down in a way that people could both understand them and believe that they could do something to help the situation. And so after a career of doing that, I was working for an organization, and just for a very short time, I just gotten hired, and I just noticed an awful lot of strange things. Having spent the bulk of my career around nonprofits, there were things that just weren't right. And I kept getting more and more suspicious. And as I started digging, I found more and more strange things. And I ended up coming forward. They were receiving government money that should go to job training programs for older people and veterans. And they were skimming off the top, skimming off the middle, skimming off the bottom. Basically, I came forward as a whistleblower. Several months later, I got contacted by person who turned out to be a special RICO agent with the Department of Labor, investigating it as a RICO crime. I told him what I knew, and he said, well, we appreciate you coming forward. How would you like to be our guy on the inside? And so for about 6 months, I was on the inside of a RICO investigation. And from that experience, I thought taking a bite out of crime is pretty satisfying. And then this job opened up, and here I am.
Wow. So tell me, what was it like when you first discovered this happened?
When I first discovered it was happening, someone who spent their entire career in the nonprofit world, helping others, trying to do good, I was like, it just didn't sit right, didn't feel right. And then you come with the moral question, all right, what do I do? And I'm like, well, it's not going to stop. And there were people who've been letting it go on for years. And I felt obliged to come forward. And I didn't know. You hear about whistleblowers all the time in the news, and you think it's a pretty straightforward process. But like with a lot of things associated with the federal government. It's anything but straightforward. I learned a lot about that. But in the end, I knew I was doing what was right, and I felt good about it because after the investigators came in and seized computers and were able to really dig through files, they uncovered a lot more. And we prevented millions and millions of dollars of taxpayer money that really needed to go to people. These are folks who were below the poverty line, and all they wanted to do was find a job and get training so they could get work to buy their grandkids a Christmas present or pay the rent or buy food. And so these, they were stealing money from the people who needed it the most. And it's just wrong.
Were you ever afraid of reprisals at that point?
Well, the whole thing about becoming a whistleblower is all about intimidation and reprisal. So the answer to that is absolutely yes. I reached out to my congressman when it started getting risky, Congressman Chris Van Hollen in Maryland, who is now our senator, and he was very helpful. He put me in touch with an attorney at the National Whistleblower Center, whistleblower.org, who gave me excellent advice and said, basically, they're going to try to intimidate you. You're the whistleblower. You let them know that. Everything you send them, you let them know you've got more fire in your belly than they do, and you're ready to battle them. And wrap yourself in the First Amendment. It's the First Amendment that actually protects whistleblowers, much more than the legislation that protects whistleblowers, I discovered.
Wow. Okay. See, were you worried that it was going to have a negative impact on your career?
To some extent it did. I went through several months of unemployment trying to regroup. It took an emotional toll more than that. I think it affected your mind. Like, how could this be happening to me? How could this be happening in the first place? I discovered that you come forward as a whistleblower, you're told you're going to receive protection. And then in the end, I'm like, okay, I need that protection now. And they're like, oh, well, actually, there's a process. So what happens is they have to open up a separate investigation into determining whether, in fact, you are a whistleblower and you didn't have any conflict of interest in all of that. So I began that process. I was told in the whole history of the Whistleblower Act, which goes back to the Lincoln administration, there were only 5 people that were granted full federal protection under the Whistleblower Act. So they said, just to give you a sense of what odds, they told me what the criteria I had to meet. And I said, well, I think I meet it. 3 months later, UPS truck shows up in front of my house. They give me a box. I have to show my ID and sign for it. The driver is like, I don't know what kind of stuff you're into, but this seems like spy stuff. And I smiled and signed the form, and I get the box. I nervously start reading this very, very thick report. I jump to the end and finally find out that it says that Mr. Del Ponte came forward to the Department of Labor with 6 allegations of fraud. After thorough investigation, the Office of the Inspector General has determined that I was right on all 6 counts, significantly aided the federal government in finding the corruption, and was hereby granted full federal protection as a whistleblower.
That's becoming the 6th member of that very unique.
Right. I'm not sure so whether I should be nervous, proud, or whatever, but I'm glad it happened. The main protection is it protects me from any reprisal. None of the people involved have any standing in court to bring any charge against me whatsoever.
That's incredible. Well, thanks for doing that amazing, like having the integrity to carry that forward. And that's not an easy decision to make. If you got family, there's family involved, but there's people that that are involved, and it's your career on the line. So thanks for making the hard decisions.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
So how did you come to find yourself at the National Crime Prevention Council? I mean, this is pretty incredible what you're doing and how it relates, but how did that all happen?
Well, like you, I was in my teenage years when McGruff hit the scene, and I'm like, oh, this is pretty good. Whatever happened to him? Gee. Maybe there's sense to be made out of what I had just gone through as a whistleblower. And so I threw my hat in the ring, and there was a search like there are any other, top position at a nonprofit. They liked the perspective I had, and they hired me. And I'm thinking part of it was a real determination to bring McGruff into current day world of media. One of the questions I got during the interview process was, does it even make sense to continue with something, a public service announcement character like McGruff the crime dog in today's more complex media environment? And to that I answered, absolutely yes, but he also needs to change. He's got to adapt. The cultural times are greatly different than they were in 1980. And I don't think anybody would argue with that. In addition to Think back then, there were only 3 networks. Dallas was the number 1 show. You've got a PSA on Dallas, 60 million people saw you in one night. That doesn't happen anymore. So you've got to be more dogged, more, no pun intended for McGruff, and more determined than ever to really be persistent, be out there, be more nimble. Culturally, too, the world of advocacy has changed dramatically since 1980. I don't think it's an overstatement or an understatement to say times are much simpler. Advocacy was different. That was before the breast cancer movement. That was before the Red Ribbons for AIDS. That was before students facing gun violence and organizing and protesting in favor of stricter gun control laws. So the way in which the public goes about taking stances and positions is greatly different today than it was in 1980. And so we incorporated a lot of that into our thinking and new programs.
Nice. Okay, great. So before it was found, what were the biggest challenges communities were faced in preventing crime?
To some extent, it's deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra once said. The country was facing rising crime rates, distrust of police and institutions, and racial tensions. So I took the job shortly, about a year after the George Floyd incidents. And so I was like, okay, it's almost, to use a 1980 analogy, it was Back to the Future. And we had to sort of work our way around some of those issues. And McGruff was created to break through those issues. Crime is a very difficult topic for people to talk about. It's scary. It sometimes brings out the worst in people. Sometimes people want to look for an easy scapegoat, the person you can blame it on. Oh, it's all the immigrants' problem. It's all the black people's problem. McGruff was created as a way in which people could dialogue and talk past those things and talk about what really will matter in keeping yourself safe.
So what was missing in crime prevention before McGruff the crime dog became a national symbol?
Crime prevention was just emerging when McGruff came out. The notion that you could take steps in advance of a crime happening and that the police and the community could evolve, those were all emerging issues. What McGruff did was he helped fast forward that. So you had things like neighborhood crime watches, which McGruff didn't create. McGruff was able to go on TV and talk about them. And almost overnight, they exploded to where communities all across the country started having a neighborhood watch program. And it was the involving youth in more positive ways. You might remember there were midnight basketball leagues in which in urban areas you could keep kids off the street by playing basketball. Those were organized by police departments who would, work with a real structured format, not just to play 1 or 2 games with kids, but to create ongoing programs so that when it came 10 or 11 o'clock at night, which is times usually where kids start getting in trouble, they had something more productive to do. So it's this notion that you can think ahead and do things that either thwart a crime or better involve people who might otherwise commit a crime.
Who were the first key people that first realized this new approach was needed?
A lot of discussions in the Department of Justice. They were perplexed. Crime's a very political issue. People don't want to talk about it. It causes fights at the kitchen table. It's those kind of things. So they reached out to the Ad Council and began discussions about, could a public service announcement campaign help? At the Justice Department at the time, there was a young staffer who was in charge with marshaling the idea through, Bob Dingelman. After the news release went out announcing that I had taken over his head, I get this phone call one day. Hi, you don't know me. I'm Bob Dingelman. I said, I know the name. And so we had lunch and he told me about the whole history of McGruff, and the ad council involved was a group of, the firm was Dancer Fitzgerald, later became Saatchi and Saatchi. The project was given to a, advertising to the creative director, Jack Kyle, and Jack, in true madman fashion, was approaching the deadline. His boss came to him and said, hey, Jack, how's that crime project going? Oh, it's great. I'm traveling on a business trip. When I come back, I'm going to lay out the whole plan. Got great ideas. Truth be told, Jack didn't have anything. He was struggling. And so he was taking a flight to, I believe it was Ohio. He landed and he started talking to the cab driver who was taking him to his hotel and said, ever think about crime? And so we got in this lengthy conversation with the cab driver. And the cab driver suggested, we don't feel safe. I got people in my cab. I wonder if I'm going to get robbed, and all these concerns that a lot of people face. He said, what we need? We need a dog. We need a dog to tell us what to do. Dogs keep us safe. And so I can imagine Jack in the back of the cab starting to scribble down and sketching things out. And that's how McGruff was born.
Wow, that's amazing. Was there any risk that this might not work out in the beginning? Did anybody think that? Was that kind of something that was in the conversation?
Absolutely. So as it turns out, the Attorney General at the time, Benjamin Civiletti, this is during the Carter administration, caught wind of the campaign. I think maybe even saw some of the ads on TV and was apparently, as the story goes, and this is through Bob Dingelman, was furious. He called a meeting of everybody involved. Bob went in, thought he was going to lose his job. And as Bob tells the story, he sat down and the Attorney General turns to him and says, "So you're the one spending all that money on that damn talking dog." And he said, "I want it to stop." And they explained to him, "Well, it's out there. You can't undo it." "Well, we're going to look stupid." And he said, "Well, actually, people really like it. We're not looking so stupid." So anyway, he relented and let the project continue. But it came within a dog's whisper, you could say, of being shut down.
Wow. So when it was introduced, when McGruff was introduced to the world, what was the initial reaction?
I like to say McGruff went viral before going viral was a thing. Like I said, I was a teenager during the time, and I remember it. It was what people talked about. We were at a hockey game a few nights ago, and we had McGruff on ice, dropping the puck and putting people in the penalty box. And leaving the arena, there were a bunch of kids screaming, as you would expect at a hockey game, and we're standing there just making our way out of the arena ourselves. And the kids said, "Oh, the best part was McGruff was there." And there was still that same sense of excitement. About a year ago, we did an event in California with some top social media influencer types. They range in age from maybe 19 to 25. Some of them had not heard of McGruff. We went through the educational program with them, told them statistics. Then we showed them the latest McGruff ad. And the walk around the room, a couple people, "Oh, yeah, that's McGruff." And then a couple other people, "Wow, they made a talking dog to talk to us." And they thought it was just the wildest, most creative thing ever. So for whatever reason, I still can't figure it out, but it just works.
Awesome. Now, what were some of the initial hurdles in getting communities to engage in crime prevention?
I think getting their heads around the idea, which we still face today. There are some who believe that policing is all about stopping people and arresting them. The best way to stop crime is to stop it before it happens. And that's what prevention is all about. And it still takes people a little bit to get their minds around that.
Gotcha. And so can you tell me about a time when the NCPC struggled to make an impact?
Many things. The ad council pulled out and said, "Well, we think McGruff ran its course and we're dropping out." And around that time, too, they were revamping how the federal government funded different things. And they said, "Well, the Department of Justice really isn't going to fund this much anymore." And that funding dwindled each year. And so there was that, and people moved on. I think one of the big factors that happened was 9/11. 9/11 forced a lot of people to rethink how we keep communities safe. And that's when you saw a lot of police departments change their uniforms, change their vehicles to more military-like styles. And I think we moved away from that. And then COVID happened and crime rates started rising again. And people said, we need to do something. So here we were, the National Crime Prevention Council, with a ready-made solution. So we started pumping that out more, getting McGruff out there more.
That's incredible. That's so awesome. And what does McGruff focus on today as it relates to what
our number one issue is combating fentanyl. It's the fentanyl and the sale of fake pills is the leading cause of death for young people in the U.S. It's absolutely abhorrent. Too many families has faced this tragedy. And so that's what we're tackling on. We have a wonderfully produced public service announcement that warns teenagers about the dangers of fentanyl and not to buy pills on social media, which is where 8 out of 10 fake pills that have caused a death are purchased on a social media platform. We coupled the public education ad campaign with a slew of public policy activities, much like I talked about. People started wearing the red ribbon for AIDS and the pink ribbon for cancer. And we created the LIES Project, which is a digital online remembrance quilt for family members and loved ones to talk about somebody who was taken from this world way too soon as a result of fentanyl. So we went at the emotional side as well. Then we also went at the policy side. We wrote and urged the Attorney General to take a very strong look at social media companies who are creating what we believe is a built-in distribution mechanism for drug dealers, that they are complicit in this act and should be prosecuted. Well, it turns out that 2 weeks after we sent that letter to the Attorney General, the FBI opened an investigation into Snapchat and several of the other social media companies. And Snapchat, Meta, and several other companies are part of an ongoing federal investigation looking at what they're doing to aid and abet drug dealers. So we're hitting it on multiple fronts.
So if the NCPC could accomplish one major goal over the next 10 years, what would that be?
I think it would be to include some greater degree of safety guardrails around social media and other internet companies. It would be modernizing policing. Your credit card gets frauded. Your bank account gets defrauded. You call the local police. They'll take a police report. They don't have the ability to do a whole lot right now, but to better digitize policing in a safe way that protects our civil rights. You don't want the police state eavesdropping on everything you're doing online, but you do want them there to protect you and keep you safe. There's an old adage, or back in the turn of the previous century, there was an infamous bank robber, Willie Sutton, who was asked by a reporter after being convicted or being hauled off in handcuffs, "Hey, Willie, why do you rob banks?" That's where the money is. Well, banks aren't building new branches. They're building apps and websites, because where is money being stolen? Being stolen online. The reason why? That's where the money is. So if the crooks are there, the police need to be there too. And that was a lot of our thinking around when we started putting McGruff out on social media. We knew there were, and people said, well, why do you have McGruff on these platforms that you're criticizing? Aren't you helping to support those platforms you're criticizing? I said, the answer is really simple. Kids are on the social media. People are on social media day in and day out, and so are criminals. Criminals are there, and people are there. McGruff needs to be there too.
What would you say are some of the NCPC's most powerful measurable impacts as of today?
As of today, our current campaign with McGruff the Crime Dog, warning about fentanyl and other fake pills and products, has reached over 5 billion impressions for a total equivalent of more than $200 million in equivalent ad time. So what we have done is we have proven that you can still effectively get a message out to millions and millions of people repeatedly, because we know science tells us, well, somebody's got to hear something about 5 times before it starts to sink in and they can take action on it. So we hit that mark. Since the campaign began on awareness around fentanyl, the death rate from fentanyl has dropped 25%.
Wow.
And I think we can't attribute that all to what we've done, but we do know that public awareness is one of the biggest factors that has brought that number down. It's way too high, and we're not going to stop until we get it down more.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, I know you're also looking at, okay, how can we keep funding our expansion? So tell me what's ahead, and what would you like the public that's hearing this to do to support McGruff and the NCPC?
Well, show your support. Show it visibly. Go to McGruff.org in the McGruff shop and buy a McGruff t-shirt. Wear it out. Let people know McGruff is still biting. And they're also all made in the USA, and McGruff supports that. And 100% of the proceeds help support our efforts to take a bite out of crime. So that's one small step you can do. It helps fund us, and it helps get increase awareness when you wear the t-shirt out at the gym or the grocery store or wherever you're going.
Amazing. All right, Paul. Well, good. Well, so anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up today's podcast?
It's part of it. There's been a lot of discussion in the country about crime, obviously what causes crime. And one thing that it's important for people to take away from that, and what we do with the National Crime Prevention Council, we never blame the victim. And whether or not you think about a teenager who made a mistake and took a pill they shouldn't have taken and they died, you don't blame them for that. Whether somebody got shot on the street, you don't blame them for that. Whether you're a woman and you're out jogging and you get attacked by somebody, you don't blame the woman for that. She wasn't asking for that. You never blame the victim. You blame the criminal, and you try to think ahead and stop the criminal before he does something bad.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on, Paul Del Ponte. As good as McGruff is as being a spokesperson for taking a bite out of crime, you are a phenomenal spokesperson for the National Crime Prevention Council. So thank you so much for being on. We really appreciate you and the work you're doing.
Well, thank you. You're very kind, and happy to come back anytime.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul.
You've seen the impact, you've heard the stories. Now the question is, what will you do? Whether it's a donation, sharing their mission, or getting involved, every action matters.
Visit therippleeffects.org to learn more and be part of something bigger than yourself. Because together, we're not just watching change happen, we are the change. Don't just watch the ripple.
Be the reason for it.